The books and records that a charity maintains must demonstrate that there's responsible governance going on, and that most of the resources that charity has are their human, physical, and financial are being used for their charitable purposes and activities. These books must also be kept at a Canadian address. CRA must be able to ascertain by looking at the books and records that the board of directors are fulfilling their responsibilities as a governance entity, that all the income and expenditures are identified, and that official tax receipts records are appropriate, and that there's evidence that the activities of the charity are charitable and appropriate. What are some of the books and records that a charity should have? We've organized them in different categories here. Now again, this is a bit of a wish list, but basically I think it provides a point of reference for one to look at their records and maybe look at some of the gaps that exist and maybe some strategies to address some of those gaps. I'll go into these records in a minute, but one of the things that we really would like to recommend is the issue of backing up resources. Often some of these resources aren't backed up appropriately, or they might be backed up but on site. And some of these resources, if something happened like a fire, then some of these records could be at risk in terms of, say, audits that might be required by CRA. Some of the records that we're looking at, one is organizational history. This could be in the form of a narrative. It's kind of like, why was the charity formed? Who were the key players, the drivers, the supporters at the beginning, the initial sources of funding, some of the milestones that were included, things like foundation meetings. Maybe this is the 5,000th person that you've now served in terms of this. So this could be used for some even marketing campaigns and that. So it provides a point of reference for people around the history of your charity. All the governing documents for your charity should be in an easily identifiable location. Things like the Articles of Incorporation, the patent letters, the objects and missions of the mandate, constitution, bylaws, policies, any correspondence with regulators, that should all be in kind of one section. Any legal contracts that your organization is involved with, leases or personal contracts or service contracts or contribution agreements, membership agreements, memorandum of understandings. This really comes into play, especially when you're dealing with other partnerships or collaborations in terms of the scope of your responsibilities. Letters confirming any financial arrangements or these collaboration agreements. These are all kind of key to kind of the financial commitments that a charity has. The financial records need to be organized so that they're really accessible. Records of accounts, again, generally kept 5 to 7 years. Again, some organizations keep them longer than that. Copies of charitable receipts. There are guidelines around CRA that they must be kept for a minimum of 2 years, but again, a lot of organizations keep them longer than that. Audited financial statements. And the information returns, which are filed on an annual basis, they should be kept. They need to become familiar with the requirements of these various bodies and making sure that the financial records that reflect the reports that are sent back to these bodies are also kept. Information about contacts that are relevant to the organization should be kept. This really is an efficiency issue. Members, participants, clients, for example, if you're looking at marketing other events, and to have all of this contact information in a searchable manner is really important in terms of ease of communication. Funders, donors, supporters. If you're running a gala, then you're sending out information to all of these individuals. If you do it on an annual basis, then it's important to have all of this updated contact information for invitations, etc. Volunteers, paid employees, service providers, consultants. Again, respecting privacy laws that do exist, but it's important to have all of this information there to facilitate communication. Any manuals or programs, templates, procedures. We know that the voluntary sector by its nature has a fair amount of turnover. And so, for example, if you're looking at new personnel coming in, then making sure that all of the procedures that are relevant to your organization are clearly identified so that If you had to start all over again, then you've got this framework around which the charity operates, accessible to staff. And then archives. These are things like annual reports, promotional materials, souvenirs, photos. Again, a lot of these can be used for marketing materials for your charity. The last thing that we identify are kind of liability and indemnity insurance. The Charities Accounting Act in 2001 allows charities to indemnify directors and buy liability insurance. And there's some guidelines in regards to that. One of the key issue is that a charity is expected to consider this issue and keep records that reflect the conversation with their board members. Because this regulation is permissive, not compulsory. So a board doesn't have to have liability insurance, but it is expected that this conversation occurs at the board and that the factors that are involved in the decision are kind of recorded within the minutes. CRA has organized an entry point in their website that really looks at each record and how long each record must be maintained. Each of the kind of records has a different time frame that CRA has identified for those records, and so we expect an organization to reference the website or the info sheet number 6 that we have, which really identifies the kind of records and the expectations around each of those records.